Welcome to another edition of the MMA Beat. I'm Ariel, Helwani. Well, this is episode number 2 of the program, and we most certainly appreciate all the great feedback that we received for episode number 1. We appreciate it so much that we've come back for at least one more episode, and there's certainly a lot to talk about on this second edition of the MMA Beat, so let us get right into it and let's introduce who is joining us today inside the SB Nation studios right here in Midtown Manhattan. We are being joined by Jack Encarnacao. He is the host of Rewind on the Sherdog radio network and also a brand new show on NBC Sports Radio 1510 AM in Boston called Mouthpiece Radio. Also, Mouthpiece MMA, I should say. That's the name. The guy has a lot of titles and it's very hard to get them all right. Now, Mike Chiappetta, of course, you remember him from last week. He is of MMAfighting.com, a familiar face, and veteran MMA journalist Mike Straka of TapouT Radio and a UFC correspondent for Fight Now TV. Well, guys, so great to have you here for episode number 2. No shortage of things to discuss, and we are coming off a wacky week in the world of the UFC. A wacky year just got a whole lot wackier because on Tuesday it was announced that the UFC 153 main event, Jose Aldo, Frankie Edgar, scrapped because Jose Aldo wasn't 100% healthy after his motorcycle accident. Then, an hour later, it was announced the co-main event was scrapped. Quinton Rampage Jackson injured his elbow. He's not fighting Glover Teixeira. 24 hours later, we find out Anderson Silva versus Stephan Bonnar, Glover Teixeira versus Fabio Maldonado, and Big Nog returning versus Dave Herman. We'll start with you, Mike. Did the UFC make the right call here? The rabbit that they pulled out of the hat, was it the right one?
Well, I think anytime you can put Anderson Silva on a card, obviously that's a good thing. Now, in terms of who he's fighting against, I don't know if people think that that's a deserving matchup for Stephan Bonnar. He's done well his last 3 fights. He's 3-0 in his last 3 fights. But this is a guy that was talking about retirement, you know, that he might be done fighting if he didn't get a big matchup. Certainly it's a big matchup. It benefits him. I don't know if it's a fight that people are seeing as competitive, which is, you know, why we all watch this thing. We like to see the best fighting the best. You know, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about Anderson Silva and should he fight Chris Weidman, and Anderson wanted to wait. He wanted to fight George St. Pierre. For me, the thing I'm wondering about is, like, they're risking the potential super fight with St. Pierre and Anderson Silva on this fight. Now, obviously they need a main event, but to put that super fight at risk when things finally seem to be lining up for it and all we needed to wait for was George St. Pierre to beat Carlos Condit. So I know there was another possible wrench in the plans if Carlos Condit beat him, but now you have to worry about 2 things going right. You have to worry about the timing again. To me, I would have liked to see them go to another option, but Anderson Silva in the main event is a pretty good backup plan.
I'll make a prediction. Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin will coach TUF the next season of TUF. Because if you remember, Stephan Bonnar really wanted it. He was lobbying for it, and Dana White said it's not going to happen. I bet you he threw that in as part of his.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I really do.
Incentives package.
Why would he have to have incentives though? Other than fighting Anderson Silva is pretty good.
That's about all. The last we heard from him, he was being kind of forced into retirement by interviewers. I think what I find really curious about it is Anderson Silva's been jonesing to get in the cage. I mean, he put his name in the hat when the John Jones Dan Henderson fight fell through, which I thought was curious. You know what? Anderson Silva, a guy who can rest on his laurels and can wait for the right fight and wait for things to play themselves out. The last we had heard, he wasn't going to fight till 2013, and suddenly he wants to get in there. I had seen somewhere that he has 1 fight left in his contract, and that would make a lot of sense. Get that fight done, get a win, and really, really drive a hard bargain when it comes time to fight GSP.
What we have to remember here is that this wasn't Plan A. It wasn't even Plan B. It probably wasn't even Plan C. This card has changed so much, and it's really been the theme for the UFC this past year. They've been hit with injuries. So I have a hard time listening to the fans and the critics who are saying, what is this main event? Where's this coming from? Because this is not what they wanted. This is not what they had planned for. They essentially really did pull a rabbit out of the hat. And when that rabbit is the greatest fighter of all time, regardless of who he's fighting, it's hard to really criticize with them, don't you think?
You do have to hold them responsible for this increased schedule, right? That's all a part of this. When it comes
You've been saying this for years, by the way.
Yeah, when it comes to replacement matchmaking, obviously it's a difficult thing. You have fights that are already set. You don't necessarily want to pull guys from cards that people have already bought tickets for. Some guys are injured, some guys are not available, they can't make weight, whatever it is on 4 weeks' notice. But the fact of the matter is UFC set this very ambitious schedule from early last year. They really, they haven't pulled back from it. So this is the situation that they've put themselves in. So now they don't get, you can't say, well, I'm going to pull back on criticism because, it's 4 weeks. Well, this is the situation that they set for themselves. Injuries are always a part of it. They have less flexibility now, so the criticism is fair.
Well, go ahead.
I think a lot of this criticism is a direct result of too much information. I think we are getting, and fans are getting way too much information from the execs at Zuffa, the fans, the reporters tweeting every moment to moment.
Right.
You know, have Dana White saying, well, the reason why Big Nog is on the card, because he was standing right next to Anderson Silva when I texted Anderson Silva, and then Nog said, I want to fight, so we put him on the card too. It's like you're inviting this criticism.
And it's like there's so much like fables about matchmaking. Like who cares how the match got made? You know, it's just people, MMA fans, especially the loudest, squeakiest wheels, soak those details up, and it confuses me because it has nothing to do with whether someone's going to buy the pay-per-view or not. You know, to be in on that level of detail has nothing to do with appreciating why the UFC made this fight, why they were forced to make the fight. That's the structure of the promotion, and it really always has been. You get dates, you get cities that you think are hungry for the show, and then you find a fight to put on it. You don't start with the fight and then find a date for it.
The model is completely backwards now, as you just said. Before, you would be like, all right, let's look at 154. It's the perfect scenario. George St. Pierre coming back in his hometown, it makes sense. But now, you pretty much have dates lined up. They have a lot of their dates lined up for 2013, and they're just plugging holes, and that's backwards as far as fight promotion goes. That's not the way it was done.
That's how they've always, as far as I can tell, that's how they've always really done it. That's been a big contrast with the boxing model.
I think the thing we also have to make mention of is the fact that this event's probably going to do better now with Anderson Silva in the headline slot.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think
as far as pay-per-views,
as far as pay-per-views,
Brazil we know will do better.
This is a business first and foremost.
Right.
They're here to make money. Obviously, there are going to be people who complain, say, Stephan Bonner maybe not deserving of this shot, or it's not a competitive fight, or it's not a title fight for Anderson Silva, whatever the case may be. The bottom line is Anderson Silva is a bigger draw than Frankie Edgar and Jose Aldo have been historically. Now, obviously, putting those two guys who are both champions together could lead to a bigger pay-per-view buy rate than they've had in the past, but Anderson Silva is pretty proven over time, and it's an interesting storyline with Bonner, at least, right? I mean, to get this veteran who's thinking about retirement, get this shot, it's sort of a rocky
He got
game.
the big Twitter followers fight that he was asking for. He kept saying that on Fuel in July when it seemed like he's semi-retired, and he got the fight. The thing, Mike, that I find to be so interesting about the criticism, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I do agree, as you mentioned, there are too many UFC fights now, and they're trying to plug, and they're spreading themselves very thin. What I find interesting about the criticism is, when they canceled UFC 151 and Anderson Silva came out and said, I would have fought a mid-tier light heavyweight and I would have saved the show, everyone was like, well, why didn't you do that fight? Now they're essentially doing that fight, and it's not good enough. And then people are criticizing him. What's better? You can't say Chris Weidman, he just had elbow surgery.
Well,
Anderson Silva's not going to fight a guy like Rashad Evans. There's nothing for him to gain. So what's better out there?
Right. And not just that, but I thought you meant Chris Weidman going up to 205. A lot of people are calling for these 85-pounders to go fight 205 to save cards. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me either. Chris Weidman could have fought John Jones. What are you talking about? Chris Weidman could have fought John Jones. He's an 85-pounder. I don't get these people.
I don't want to see guys ruin the path that they're on and get sidetracked
like
to save cards. I think that's almost what John Jones was saying. Why do I need to take this fight to save your card?
Well, it's hilarious because Chael Sonnen, a middleweight, coming off two losses, coming off a win and then a loss to Silva. Everyone was ready for him to get a light heavyweight title shot, and now this fight falls apart. So you had a middleweight jumping up to 205 on absolute short notice to fight a huge fight. And everyone thought that was the move to make. And now you have the exact same thing in Rio, and people don't share that opinion.
And another thing that came out of this, another quotable is, this is old school UFC right here that's going on. Well, okay, fine, but it's not old school anymore. John Jones is right. He's fighting for a lot of money on the line. Both his brothers are professional football players. He's getting real advice from real sports people. Not that MMA guys aren't real sports people, but you understand what I'm saying. Football people have been around this sport for 50, 60 years, and they've come around, and people that are around Chandler and around Arthur Jones are very, very intuitive and very sports business minded. And being old school UFC is not necessarily good for your career.
It's funny, Mike and I were sitting here last week with Luke Thomas, and by the way, did you beat him up or something? Because it's kind of funny you're sitting anyway. And also, by the way, nice of you to dress up. Yeah, seriously. I mean,
well, that's why
can you dress a little nicer, Mike? Seriously.
Dapper.
But we were sitting here, we were talking about the fourth quarter of 2012, and if all the fights would pan out as they were scheduled, it would be a great fourth quarter. There were so many big fights. It didn't take long, as Mike just said. 153, flip turned upside down. Now we have Anderson Silva versus Stephan Bonner. the injury epidemic is the story of the year. Forget about Fox, forget about, it's a huge story, and it's almost reached the point where it's no longer a freak thing like UFC 133 last year or 125 a couple years ago. It is consistent. Now fans, I'll tell you a funny story. I was talking to my mother, and she said to me, when is the UFC coming back to Montreal? And I said, November 17th. She said, who's fighting? And I said, George St. Pierre versus Carlos Condit. My mother, who is just a fan of mine, essentially said, let's see who gets injured between now and then. That's how big this has become. It's a big problem. Is it a freak thing, Mike, or do you think there's a major thing that they have to look at?
I don't think there's anything you can do about it. I mean, if I had the answer to this, or you did, or anybody else, we wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be millionaires because we could sell the secret to the NFL and Major League Baseball and any other sport. I mean, this is sports. Guys get hurt. When your body is your physical tool and that's how you make your living, sometimes it's going to betray you. That's just how it is. I mean, I'm a Yankee fan. I mean, the Yankees have been decimated by injuries. They have an all-star team on the disabled list. If there was a way to keep these guys healthy, sports like baseball and football, which have had a lot more money invested for a lot longer time, would have figured it out by now. Obviously, it's a very different sport. The way they train is different, but this is just a very physical sport, and guys are going to get hurt. There's no answer to it.
Well, the answer is less fights. I mean, remember back in the early 2000s.
But guys are still going to get hurt when they train.
Yeah, but my point is, in the early 2000s, when you had 4 fights a year, you had stacked cards. So if the main event fell out, the co-main event was perfectly able to fill that hole, and we're not seeing those.
But then
anymore.
it's less fights for the fighters. Right,
Yeah,
that's the flip side.
I agree.
They have all these fights for a reason. They don't have all these fights because they think it'd be a great idea. They have all these fights because there are TV networks willing to pay them to put these shows on. And you just don't pass up the money when you're in growth mode, especially when you want to go international. You have this feeling that all these markets are clamoring for you to come, and you can't keep up with the cities that want your shows. That's what they always say, right? And then when they go there, tickets, they don't necessarily sell out like they used to first day in a city, or in a rare appearance in a city. But this schedule is not so full because they think it's a grand design. It's because there's that many demands on them as a company.
But then why do you see fighters these days? George Masvidal is a perfect example, saying I need to fight somewhere else because I'm not getting enough fights in Strikeforce. Why not just bring all of these fighters in and actually make your talent pool bigger? Because
it's already double the size of what it should be, and a lot of
the
people's
Strikeforce
estimation.
story is a whole other story because they have to deal with Showtime. But I know
we're talking about too many fights, and we're saying that
we're talking about not enough stars. That's what this comes down to. Not enough guys that seem suitable replacements when a main event falls through.
And that is a big problem as well. You have to start developing those stars to be pay-per-view headliners. But I want to just throw out this because I know a lot of people bring it up. This has nothing to do with the insurance, the medical insurance.
Of course not.
I mean, to think that a guy is going to pull out of a fight
because he can afford to go to the doctor,
and he doesn't make, he doesn't get his win bonus, he doesn't get his show money, nothing. So people are saying this is starting to happen ever since the UFC was giving these guys medical insurance. That's just absolutely ludicrous. I really truly think it's a training thing at this point. And on top of it, a lot more fights magnified. And on top of it, I think that guys are maybe pushing themselves to try to come in because they're afraid of losing their jobs, they're afraid of losing their spot. And when you look at it, Kenny Florin has said this to me thousands of times, and I think he nailed it. There are too many cooks in the kitchen. There's a boxing guy, a wrestling guy, a Muay Thai guy, jiu-jitsu guy, and they're not listening to each other, they're not working in unison, and they're not all working for the same thing, and that's getting this guy prepared and doing what I have to. If he has to taper off, fine. But this guy's coming here, he's working 100%, then he's coming here and he may have injuries. And I think these guys need to get on the same page because they're pushing their athletes too much. And as a result, too many guys are getting injured.
It's not just the coaches pushing their athletes. Sometimes their sparring partners want to prove something to the people in the room. You go to AKA, for instance, and say you're just a boxing sparring partner who's been invited in to come in and do some rounds with Cain Velasquez. You look around the room and there's world champion fighters. All of a sudden you're up and you want to show these guys, I can hang with Cain Velasquez. Right. And next thing you know, somebody's getting hurt. And that's exactly what's happening. I won't mention any names, but I saw a couple camps just this past couple weeks. And these guys go really, really hard, man. Really hard.
I think the fact of the matter is, as the sport gets bigger and there's more at stake for these guys, there's more at stake in terms of purses and sponsorship money and just opportunities as far as where your career goes. Guys are going to be more careful if they can be. If they can afford to pull out of a fight and be able to still pay their rent, obviously the insurance isn't paying the rent, but if they can afford to do that, if they save enough money, it makes sense to try and fight as healthy as you can. There's a lot at stake, man. You can be cut after one fight, A lot of times the UFC gives them more leeway. They'll give them at least 2. But that's not a lot of wiggle room,
Right.
If you go in and you're 50%, you know, your meniscus is torn. You see guys come in with like, you know, partially torn ACLs and this and that. I mean, what's the upside to go in with all that injury and know you're at a disadvantage, and you there's a pretty good chance you'll lose. Even if you're a confident person, which all these guys are, to do what they do for a living, you have to know that that's a huge risk that you're taking, and you're putting your career in jeopardy by doing it.
I mentioned muscle tears, and that's it. I mean, sometimes, you know, Roy got cut. Fighters have always gotten cut, and that's, you know, delayed fights. But it's the intensity of the wrestling training that leads to muscle tears, and that's where all these injuries seem to be coming from. Guys getting their foot stuck in the mat. Eric Koch told a really good story about how
his toes got caught.
He went out too tired for his own body. He's pushing himself past exhaustion, and all that does is set you up to not be enough in tune with your physicality to know when you're really going too far till it's too late. And then you start to baby it so that you can get through the camp and still be ready for the fight, and then that messes with your mind because you can't push off the foot. GSP has told this story in great detail. I interviewed Faraz Sahabi about it. You know, so the psychology behind knowing you can't use your knee. It's not that the knee hurts, and it's not that it's completely useless. It's that you can't feel confident. Footwork, shooting, and it seems like when it comes to the torn muscles, which are the biggest problem, unless you fly off a motorcycle or something, it's wrestling training that needs to be looked at.
It's like Koch said, like you just, in that same interview, I read the same thing. He said, I feel like if I move it, it's going to pop out. And you know, that screws with your mind, and next thing you know, you're changing your fight strategy, and you're changing the way you fight, because you're afraid that your knee's going to give out.
We haven't even touched on the fact that a lot of these gyms are crowded and guys are sometimes bumping into each other.
Rashad and Diego Sanchez.
And it happened to Dominic Cruz as well.
Brian Stan.
It's crazy. It's crazy that guys are bumping into each other and getting injured. Now, I also think that it's important to mention that the worst part about this, a lot of people blame the UFC for these injuries, but at the end of the day, the UFC wants these guys to fight. I mean, you can't really blame the UFC. The byproduct, and where the UFC really suffers, is that they announce, let's say, UFC on Fox 5, right? It's a massive card, it's a great stacked card, everyone's very excited. But I don't know about you guys, like when we report something on Twitter, the fans say, well, like my mother, let's see who gets hurt between now and then. And I think fans aren't going to buy tickets, they're not going to plan trips, not going to buy plane tickets. They're going to wait a week or two before to really then invest themselves into this card. And that's where it's really going to hurt the UFC, because no one believes them anymore. No one believes that these fights are actually going to happen, and that's a huge problem.
What's really unfortunate is this is all happening at the same time where it appears the consumer is getting a lot more selective about what shows they'll buy tickets for and what pay-per-views they'll buy. I talked to Keith Kaiser, the director of Nevada State Athletic Commission, and he was saying he's noticed in Vegas that it's the main event now, just like in boxing, it's the main event. Whereas before you had a pretty consistent turnout for 6 UFCs a year in Vegas, regardless of who was on the card. The UFC was the thing. That is changing just at the same time these injuries is making it so hard to actually sell a main event on the on sale. It wouldn't be so bad if people were buying tickets just to see the UFC, which is what accounts for them doing so well the first time they go to a market. They do gangbusters because people just want to see the show. They don't necessarily need to see the fight. Now, that's changed slowly, I think, in the past few years. And when you see the peaks and valleys of the buys on some of these shows, it's like there's just hundreds of thousands of people who are just waiting for a certain fighter to decide to buy a pay-per-view.
It's almost like inflation, the inflation effect. I mean, I wrote a story a couple weeks ago about the injury epidemic that's hit the UFC this year, and it's not necessarily new, but in it, one thing that was interesting that I found was that in 2005, there was like 80 fights total in the UFC, 80 fights total. In the first three quarters of 2012, there was 78 injuries that split up 78 fights. There was injuries that split up 78 fights, and that's just fights that
like
were
a third
canceled.
of the fights aren't going to happen.
Yeah,
you have to factor that in.
So that's how do you come back from it? I think the thing is that back in 2005, 2006, when the sport was just getting bigger, the fights were infrequent enough that everybody came across as a star. You know, you were seeing it, you know, at maybe once a month you were watching an event. They were able to put time into each guy. You learned a little bit about each guy because this was sort of an irregular thing. Now, there's so many events. When there's so many events, nothing really stands out. Everything, you know, when everything is supposed to be extraordinary, everything is ordinary. You know what I mean? It's hard to really break out from the pack. So,
and the countdown shows are the key vehicle to telling those stories, right? The whole thing Dana's always said is, why do I care about this guy fighting? Not what's on the line. Why do I care about this guy? And it's personality and it's star power, like we've talked about. And with all these countdown shows, they do so many countdown shows. It's like I have no time to process everyone's story and no time to process all the different stars in this universe that they're trying to sell to me. It's like in the past, past, when you had less shows a year, you had sort of a more reliable schedule for things to sink in, the story you wanted to tell about the fighter. There's just no time for anything to sink in.
Yeah, I remember when the very first prime time was GSP versus BJ Penn, and how much news did that show make? You know, now it's like it's on my DVR from like 4 months ago. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Right. Now let me ask you this, Mike. Obviously, we were talking about injuries and what happens inside the gym. Jack earlier mentioned motorcycles, and you can't blame the UFC, you can't blame training for what happened to Jose Aldo. He got on a motorcycle and he got in an accident, and now he's injured. Kyle Kingsbury also got injured in a motorcycle accident. Thankfully for him, he's going to fight later on this month. It is amazing to me, forget about MMA and what's happened with Frank Mir and other guys in the past. It's amazing to me that someone with so much at stake in the prime of his life, prime of his career, a guy who came from nothing, would go on a motorcycle at this stage of his life and put himself in that kind of danger. What can the UFC do, if anything? You're a smart guy. What can they do? Put that in the contract. No motorcycles. Ban them.
It doesn't matter if it's in the contract. He would have done it anyway.
Yeah.
Really?
Really
these dudes are wired differently.
I was going to say, you're really surprised the guys who get in a cage and punch each other in the
How
face.
can they be so
Donald
living do
Cerrone
this?
goes wakeboarding in the Hoover Dam, in the Hoover River, whatever it's called, lake, whatever. And it's like the day of the fight. On Saturday of fight, he's wakeboarding.
Kicked by a horse, right?
Yeah.
Recently?
You
Or something like
must
that?
be penalized. Something has to happen if you're going to do that and ruin a card.
I mean, everyone's ruining cards anyway.
Yeah, but
I assume you can put it into a contract that they're prohibited from
matter.
doing these things. But
Look,
like Mike
what are you
said,
going to do? Like fiduciarily, if that's even a word, he's already been penalized. He's not fighting at 153. He's losing all the money he would have made anyway. So how are you going to punish him more?
And
That's exactly what I was going to say. In other sports, like these clauses exist in other sports, in football and baseball and basketball. Guys cannot do these risky activities. They can't go jumping out of airplanes. They can't ride motorcycles. And we've seen, there has been cases where guys do this stuff and they get caught. You know, they have an accident or whatever. They try and hide it, but the team finds out the truth. What happens? They get fined. They get a big fine. They can have their contracts revoked where it's completely null and void. But in the UFC, like Mike said, if they can't fight, they're not getting paid. So that financial issue it's already there for them. If they can't fight, they're not going to get paid. And you can't penalize them further money-wise. So what can you really do?
And in the other sports, you're talking about salaried employees. You're not talking about independent contractors.
Right.
There's only so many conditions you can attach to an independent contractor. You know what I mean? You can't like control his whole life if he's not a full-time employee.
You know, even in Hollywood, like a Lindsay Lohan film has to go through an insurance auditor first. Like you can't get insurance. You can't insure Lindsay Lohan to do a film. They're not going to cast her in a film. But UFC's not like that. They don't even have insurance for that fight event. They have to pay for it.
how about just banning
Jose Aldo and Lindsay
How about
Lohan.
just banning motorcycles?
That's awesome.
Period. I mean, they're kind of stupid.
Oh,
let's
like
be
in the
honest.
world?
Yeah, in the world.
Well, gas is $4.75 a gallon now.
Yeah,
so motorcycles, you can not fill up your
There
tank.
goes like 25% of the UFC's ad budget.
All right, well that is true. That's a very good point. Hey, Harley Davidson. Okay, you're not a fan of my banning motorcycles in the contract or at least penalizing guys. Let's talk about another contract issue that has come up recently, and it relates to Bellator, because obviously this Tyson Nam situation has gotten a lot of press. Tyson Nam was signed to Bellator, never fought for Bellator. They release him. He goes off to Brazil to fight in a Shudo event, knocks out their bantamweight champion Eduardo Dantas, and now he is going out and trying to cash in, and Bellator saying, we have a right to match. Roger Hollett was supposed to fight at UFC 152 against Matt Hamill. He verbally agreed. The UFC announced it. Bellator says, who, by the way, released Roger after just one fight earlier this year, we have a right to match. We're going to sit on this. We're going to think about it. UFC kind of gives up, impatient. They say, we're not booking you. Vladimir Matyushenko gets booked. Vladimir Matyushenko gets injured. Enough time has passed where Bellator then said, after this fight was announced, the Matyushenko-Hamill fight, that, okay, we're letting you go, Roger Hollett, and then he comes back in. Here's the thing, and Bjorn Rebney sent me a statement that said this is no different than what the UFC has in their contracts or any other fight promotion.
Well, yeah, they copied them all, remember?
But here's the thing, very good, but here's the thing about matching. If the UFC releases someone, and I asked them this, never in their history have they released someone and then exercised the right to
Miguel
match
Torres,
their
perfect
offer.
example.
You can't, if you release a guy like
What does
Nam,
release mean?
Then why would you sit there and be, you had the guy under contract. Why are you sitting there and trying to match the offer? This, in my opinion, is a little unethical, don't you think?
Well, you got, Bjorn's a lawyer. Lawyers, they look at the world differently. They look at, I think as a general rule, they really do. They see kind of, they're trying to cover as many bases as they can. And it's not a general rule that they'll exercise this. I mean, if Tyson Nam didn't knock out Eduardo Dantas, they wouldn't want to match Tyson Nam's next offer.
Sure.
But suddenly it's in his interest, it's in his wheelhouse, and he wants to get Tyson Nam in the tournament.
Does he, though?
I'm sure he does.
Well, he had
him.
a chance.
He had him.
And then
but now that he knocked out his champion,
Right.
of course he does. Same thing with when Travis View knocked out Christian Mpumbu.
Right. But here's the thing. They didn't release Travis. They released Nam because they didn't think he was good. Now he went out and fought this fight.
Yeah.
You released him. So now you start at square one, in my opinion, and you have to bid for his services. You released the guy. You had him in your possession. You released him.
Yeah.
How can you then claim to now be able to
Yeah,
match?
I mean, that's exactly what release means.
Right.
Release means we're letting you go.
But it
That's
goes
what it means.
back
There
to
shouldn't
what
be
I
any
said earlier.
riders to that or clauses saying, oh, well, if something happens, then we can pull you back in. No, that's not how a release should work. If that is in the contract, I mean, I don't know if that's in the UFC contracts. I don't know. I
The
really
UFC
don't know.
has this in their contracts, but they told me, this is what they told me, they have never exercised that right. If they release a guy
That
like
should-
Miguel
yeah, I
Torres,
don't know. I
they
don't
don't get
know.
in a bidding war for him because they just released him.
Honestly, if I'm a
it goes-
manager, I'm not letting that in the contract.
Exactly,
How
that's
do
my
you
point.
hold on?
And
you know,
that's a great
why
point,
is that
and we should
happening?
bring that up.
Why is
That's
that
my
happening
point.
for
I mean,
managers and
it
agents?
goes back to what I said earlier. That, John Jones is surrounded by professional NFL people, around his family all the time, and he's seeing a whole different side of business that he's never seen before. MMA fighters don't have that. They're happy to be in the show,
Right.
and they'll sign whatever gets put in front of
Yeah,
them.
and this is another reason, like we were talking about last week about unions. This is things like this, or that is so patently unfair. It's ridiculous. That probably would be illegal
Not
if
to
they
mention-
actually challenged it in the court of law. It might be illegal. I don't know.
And Tyson was on the shelf for the whole year.
Right.
And he gets one fight, and then they want to put him back on the shelf. And,
But on the
and-
flip side of it, let's say you get an offer from Bellator, you're a guy who's making $5,000 on the regional circuit, you're going to take it.
Yeah.
You have no choice.
Right.
You have no choice. So they're in a tough spot there, but you're 100% right. It is worth mentioning, these guys don't have to sign the contracts. They do, and I bet a lot of them don't even read them that well, and they find
Exactly.
out after, oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah,
Well, I was
they're
going to
just-
say that when you said put it in a contract about the motorcycle and Jose Aldo can't. I was going to say, do you think he reads his contract? I don't think he even reads his contract.
Well, you'd hope his
His
manager reads it.
Well, once you get to a certain level, you've got someone doing that work for you. But they'll sign whatever they need to sign to get the opportunity, and then they'll complain later
Yeah,
about
that's-
what the terms are. And you can put something in a contract, but not until someone spends the money to fight it in court and get a decision.
Exactly.
Do you know if it's actually legal? And that's where unions come in. They can fund that legal effort.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's eventually got to stand up to these organizations and say, we are going to fight you in court. Like when Randy Couture took the UFC to court with the Champions Clause in 2007, was it? Or 2008?
7, yeah.
He lost.
No,
Well, it kinda just- he gave up.
He gave up.
Right.
He because he didn't want to drag it out. I mean,
Maybe
he was
that's a
already
form of
40.
losing.
Well, no, I mean he was already 43. I mean, the wheels of justice grind very slowly. He wasn't, he didn't want to wait till he was 50 to get a resolution. So he decided to come to terms with them, and that's fine. Everybody's got. But at some point, some of these things have to be challenged to find out whether that's fair or not. I mean, the champion clause basically says that as long as you keep winning, we have your rights forever. Forever and
If you wear
ever
our-
for
if you
eternity,
wear our
and you
belt.
can never go
No.
anywhere else. I mean, that to me is like in baseball with the Kurt Flood case, which I don't know how many people watching this are baseball fans, but you cannot be held to one
Yeah,
team
but
or one organization
ask
forever.
Tim
You just
Sylvia
can't.
how
That's
that
where
worked out
baseball
for him.
unions
He was a
came from.
champion, and he went and fought for Affliction. Got paid $700,000 guaranteed to fight Fedor Emelianenko for 37 seconds.
Well, that was off the loss to Nogueira, though, and then it got cut.
but he was still a champion.
No, but he's saying an existing
Yeah,
champion,
existing
an existing
champion.
belt holder. They say you can't.
your
That's
contract
why
gets
Randy
rolled
Champions
over.
clause.
That's why Randy was frozen out, and
Right.
why Dana always said, "Big Nog's waiting to fight you, Randy." When all that
and they kept
Fedor
offering
stuff.
him fights because they had to contractually offer him fights,
Right.
even while they were going through the court.
Well, Randy made a lot of mistakes in that lawsuit. I mean, his whole press conference was a
Well,
disaster.
I mean, but who cares? But I mean, the point of the matter is,
Right.
is they need to go through. Some fighter needs to be brave enough and be willing to put enough time of his life aside to say, I'm going to go through this fight.
it
And I
sounds
know
like there's
that's a
one
lot
guy
to say.
willing to do that right now.
Who's that?
John Jones.
Well, I mean, it depends if they wanted to go to the mat with him, and it sounds like they've already gotten over it. It took about 2 weeks, which is amazing.
I don't know. John
about
hasn't
that.
really-
I don't think John got over it.
No,
At
but
conference
it's-
call the other day, he was still.
Yeah, he's still saying things, but I'm not so sure we're looking at something legal. I think after UFC 152, if he finishes Belfort, everyone will forget for the most part. They'll remember it happened, but they won't hold it against John Jones anymore if he looks phenomenal.
The UFC has lost out on a lot of big fights this year. A big fight that they can cash in on, at least Zuffa, the parent company of the UFC and Strikeforce, is Ronda Rousey versus Chris Cyborg. Ronda was on my show, the MMA Hour, earlier this week, and she called this potentially the biggest fight in MMA history. Now, that's up for debate, and I don't think a lot of people would agree with that because women's MMA just isn't that popular right now. But the question is, if Zuffa and Strikeforce and Showtime fail to make this fight happen right away, how big of a mistake is that? With, you know, we've seen this with Crow Cop and Randy, and we've seen this time and time again when there's a big fight on the horizon, and for whatever reason it doesn't happen. If they can make this happen, the Strikeforce title doesn't mean all that much. Make it happen at 140, figure it out, even if it's 145, 135, make it happen. You have to make this happen. If they mess this up, if they can't make this happen, how big of a blunder is it?
Well, it's a huge blunder. I mean, there are a lot of no-brainer fights that we never saw. So it's obviously it's easier said than done, especially when you have Ronda driving a pretty hard bargain on weight. You know, Chris is saying, I can't make it. She's saying, yes, you can, stop doing steroids. And that's kind of like a loggerheads. I mean, how do you get over that? Someone has to give. They're both proud women. They probably won't. I don't know. It's if you throw into the mix a potential of putting that in the octagon, which everyone talks about as if it's possible. You know, a lot of people that know what they're talking about seem to hint that that could be a UFC fight. Maybe
It should be a UFC fight.
It certainly should be. It'd be a great fight for
But
Fox.
if I'm Showtime,
Yeah, you
I don't
can't.
like that.
No, I mean, well, it depends. I mean, if you can tell Steven Espinoza at Showtime, look, you're going to get the winner. He's coming back to your network after. She's coming back to your network after
But that's
being
the
on
fight.
Fox.
That's the fight. Like,
No, that's true.
if the
No,
next fight
I
is
don't
the
think
winner
it's gonna
versus Sarah
happen either.
McMahon, it doesn't really mean
I
all that
agree.
much.
I agree. I don't think it'll happen either.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, like, there are a lot of other things that could happen that will make the weight thing go away.
Well, and there's also, how long is that Showtime contract for? I mean,
They have an
there was
option to extend
speculation.
a couple
Yeah,
more years.
there's one more option.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's at least a couple more years left. Ronda
If
isn't
they
going anywhere.
exercise their option.
And they're going
I
to.
think right now, I
Showtime's-
mean, there's time to go through all this posturing as far as I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that and you have to meet me on my turf and fight. There's time for that right now because Chris Cyborg's still on suspension. They can't promote this fight now anyways. And this is, honestly, this is a good way to keep the fight in the news media, you know? They're doing a lot of talking about this fight. That's how you build up a fight. You start the storyline early, you keep it going, you add a few wrinkles in here and there, and then when the fight comes around, everybody's gonna know what's happening. I actually spoke to Tito Ortiz last night about this whole thing, and he basically, because he's managing Chris Cyborg now, and he said, you know, I'm not gonna let her fight below 140. I don't think it's healthy for her. Her doctor said she can't do it, and I'm not going to have my fighter do something that's unhealthy for her. Ronda's fought at 145. Let's do the 140 catch weight. You know, that's as low as we'll go. And I think that's eventually what's going to happen. I mean, Ronda wants it at 135. Chris wants it at 145. Obviously,
Well, Ronda
they have to make
softened
this
her
fight. It's done.
stance a little bit after John Jones turned down Chael Sonnen, and she came out and said, oh, you know, I said that I would only fight her at 135, but if Dana White and Zuffa wants me to fight at 140, I'll do it, you know, because she softened her stance, because now the predominant notion is a champion has to take any fight that's offered, you know.
Well, I think she said that too because of the potential, the spark of potential that it could be in the UFC. I think there's reasons he says Dana White and not
I think
Showtime.
it should be on Fox.
Oh,
Yeah, but
of course
again,
it
if
should
I'm
be.
Showtime,
No, it won't happen.
and then there's another question: should Showtime put this on pay-per-view? You know, they put that Baroni Shamrock
think so.
fight on. You don't think so?
No, I don't.
How many buys do you think they get?
Well, I mean, Ronda's done pretty good TV ratings, but she's getting there. She hasn't arrived. The Cyborg Gina fight, for example, as that high watermark, hasn't happened yet. And so it's sort of after that where you're a pay-per-view draw in my kind of sense. I think you're going to do massive TV numbers just as Gina did on CBS for the appeal of Ronda Rousey and the appeal of, you know, the
But you won't get that on Showtime, though.
No, of course you won't, which is why Fox is,
Right.
is what he's talking about.
Yeah, but my question is, should Showtime try to cash in even more? They put on pay-per-views, boxing
Well, yeah,
pay-per-views.
yeah.
Should they try to cash in even more and put this on pay-per-view, or do they just use this fight as a way? Because throw out the Fox thing. It's not happening. The
Yeah,
Fox
that's
thing
true.
is not going to happen.
I think for Showtime, they want high ratings. They want their averages to go up for Showtime, Showtime Sports unit, and that would be such a huge. That would make their whole quarter. So yeah. they'll go for it.
You know, and Coker was talking even back in the Ken Hirschman era of Showtime Sports that he wanted to do a pay-per-view and he wanted to do more and more, at least once or twice a year. So, I mean, this could be an entree to that.
This is the way their deal is structured. Their deal is to do events on Showtime,
Right.
not Showtime pay-per-view. I mean, there's enough pay-per-views for fans to buy. You'd ask them to buy another one. That's why, you know, as Mike said, if you put out a UFC pay-per-view or something like that, then you could almost justify it as, you know, a co-main event under another big title fight or something
Right.
like that. But
It has to be.
To ask fans to plunk out another $55. It's a lot.
I
and then what happens
honestly-
if one of them gets hurt?
Oh God, don't depress me.
I had to bring it back.
It's
around.
not obviously it's not up to Steven Espinosa. I mean, it's up. It probably goes as high as Philippe Dumont again at Viacom, and here you have Dana White versus Philippe Dumont again. But I think that honestly,
No one knows what you're talking about, but that's a different story for a different
well,
day.
the whole reason why UFC left Spike to begin with and went to Fox, was people butted heads. But my point is, I would think that Espinosa would be willing to say, or lend her out to a UFC pay-per-view card and be a co-main event, because I think it actually helps. And then now you're promoting, promote Showtime Sports, promote a boxing event, do something, give us something back.
Right. Well, I just don't see it happening. Okay, so let's end on this note, and we're sticking with the TV theme. On Friday, the 16th season of The Ultimate Fighter debuted on FX. It's not live this time, but it is on Friday nights, a time slot that I don't think Dana White is a big fan of. It's Shane Carwin versus Roy Nelson. I'm wondering, do any of you care about The Ultimate Fighter?
I care about it in so much as it is still the premier platform for the UFC to make stars. In terms of audience, I mean, the last season was the lowest rated they've ever done. There was the new time slot element. There were a lot of other reasons perhaps for that. And new network, it takes people time to find a show on a different channel. You can't just flip the switch and expect everyone to get it. For me, it's still Roy Nelson, Shane Carwin. Think of how much more that's going to mean because they're doing this. And for me, I'm kind of a fan of promotion, and I'm interested in how that process works. And so for that reason, I find it it's pretty lame to really care about how mixed martial arts works and not follow The Ultimate Fighter. I know sometimes it's difficult maybe to watch and it can be boring, and the first few seasons set such a high watermark. But that was at a time when prospects like Forrest Griffin and Rashad Evans were just looking for any opportunity. Now they're gobbled up immediately by Bellator, Strikeforce, or the UFC even, which has a 400-fighter roster. So you got to adjust your expectations when it comes to the guys in the house. But if you're really interested in how MMA works and how fighters develop and pay-per-views are sold, you got to watch Ultimate Fighter to understand it.
I think there's less interest in the Ultimate Fighter for two reasons. One is that there's more free MMA on the air than there's ever been on Fox, on FX, on Fuel. I think there's 18 free events this year on those three Fox-owned networks. So if you miss Ultimate Fighter, there's plenty of fights you can watch. And the other thing is, as we said, airing on Friday. I mean, Friday, you're already asking fans to stay home on Saturday nights 30-something times a year to watch the UFC. Now you're asking them to stay home, what is it? How many shows are there in a season? 12?
It's like 12 to
24.
14.
That's almost half the year, 24 shows a year that you're asking them to stay home on Friday nights. That's a lot of Fridays and Saturday nights at home for a very young demographic that likes to go out and socialize with people and be amongst other people and not be watching TV
And
all day
don't
long.
have Twitters.
Wait a minute, come on, you got to get on Twitter. But I think those, at least one of those problems can be fixed. Move it back to Wednesday, which was its home and Spike for a long time. I think a lot more people are home on Wednesday nights. It's a work night. You're not sacrificing time out.
Move it to Fuel. Because obviously the Wednesday
the Ultimate
lineup,
Fighter?
the Wednesday lineup on FX is it's huge.
Right.
They're not gonna make way for the Ultimate Fighter.
Well, what if it's on
Wednesday
at 11
FX?
p.m.? It used to be
Right.
on 11 p.m. on Spike. You can do that.
Although Spike in a much different place than FX is in right now, they could use that, and it made sense after Monday Night Raw way back when. I think what they got right this time, and I truly believe that the Ultimate Fighter needs a fresh coat of paint. I think it looks the same.
Well, it had a fresh coat of paint last season.
I
It
don't
didn't
think
do
that was
so well.
enough. I don't think the coaches, the live, and I think all this is just variations. It's not a fresh coat of paint. Like The Real World on MTV, this is a long-standing reality show, right? They change cities, they have different jobs, different dynamic with the cast members. Here, it's all kind of the same thing. I think what they got right by going back
You still
to the
watch
tape.
The Real World?
I love The Real World. It's fantastic. I think what they got right about going back to the tape format was, I almost feel like it's inhumane to keep these guys in that house for 13 weeks with no connection with the outside world.
It's like Mayweather being in prison.
Right, exactly.
It's inhumane.
and two, I like having
Same
guys
thing.
like Roy Nelson and Shane Carwin as coaches as opposed to champions, because I
Exactly.
think it holds up the belt. But I truly believe that the show is it's stale at this point.
But what is the fresh coat of paint to put on? Otherwise, other than
need
putting it in a different
Star
city.
power. It's star power.
Yeah,
it
it
really
is.
is.
Yeah.
It is Forrest Griffin versus Stephen Bonner as coaches. That's a big rated
care,
season.
though? Do you
No,
care?
I don't. Listen, it's an unfair question to ask three journalists who cover the sport if we care about it. We have to care about it.
Absolutely, but do you feel, back in the day, I mean, when I was covering the sport, when Kimbo was on, there was a hook there, right? We were sitting, I remember being at a Yankees game, leaving early to go home because I had to watch this. This was a major part of the sport. I think if you have something, simple fresh coat of paint, and I know the first one didn't work out, and it was the lowest rated season on Spike, but the comebacks now with so many ex-UFC fighters out there, we know these guys, we're invested in these guys, we know their stories, you don't have to retell them. You have a comeback season with some of these familiar names, the Roger Huertas of the world, who knows, the Tim Sylvias of the world. You know what I'm saying? You have these guys who we know, we're invested in, we care about. Now you got something. Now you got a fresh coat of
Ultimate
paint.
Fighter with guys that are on the current roster.
Yeah.
A tournament. We like that stuff. That's a fresh coat of paint.
You could do Ronda versus Cyborg as coaches.
Fresh coat of paint. That's what I'm talking about.
And that
Coach men though. Coach men.
Oh, well, that's kind of interesting.
Make it interesting.
And let me tell you, Tim Sylvia on the other end of that show is not going for the 8 and 8.
Exactly.
It's 16 and 16, which is a big part of Ultimate Fighter too, is that they can budget for how much the winner's going to make.
And I just think that if you get these guys who we know about and we care about and we know their story, you bring them into the house and it's a tournament. Everyone loves a tournament. Yeah. Now it's something interesting. Now it's something we can get behind.
But even, this is, I don't know if I'm reaching here, but they do those finale shows at the Pearl at the Palms. It's a small venue. It holds like 3,500 people. So right then, UFC, by doing that, is telling us, well, it's not that important.
I don't know about that. I just think that there's a lot of events, and I think it makes sense to have the finale there because there are not a lot of big names on the card. I like the fact that they're putting the coaches on the tough finale card now as opposed to on pay-per-view because it just makes sense. That's why I like having guys like Carwin and Nelson as coaches because they're not quite top tier, they're not holding up a title, they're not holding up a division, but the fight makes sense and they're interesting. And I am somewhat interested, I will say, to see the dynamic between Roy and Dana because they have teased that a lot.
You just have to pick the right guys and suddenly the ratings are up again. I mean, I remember people were saying tough 5, tough 6, tough 7, no one cares about tough anymore, and then tough 10 shatters all records.
You're right.
It's all about the stars that are on TV. This is a
The
star-driven
comeback
business.
show was great too. How about another comeback show? I
Well,
thought that was
that's what I'm saying.
fantastic.
That's what I've been saying.
Oh,
Have you been here
With
the whole
Tim-
time?
That's how Tim Sylvia came. That's how Tim Sylvia suddenly
He's
came.
called the Mike
But
Francesa.
I'll tell you what, if you're worried about Ultimate Fighter and the format being stale, they are so locked into this concept internationally with tough India, with tough Brazil.
Yeah.
It's going to be that is the formula when they go to a new market. So to mess with it now,
And it could work there,
But
I'm not sure if it still works here.
It doesn't translate. I mean, I love the storylines of a guy coming out of a favela, and he's crying, but after a while, like everybody's crying, man.
There was
And it's
a
like,
lot
I
of
don't want to
crying
see
on
it
that show.
anymore.
There was a
It's
lot
hard
of
for me to
crying.
watch it. It's
There was a lot
hard,
of
and then to have Vitor, oh, God's watching out for you. I love Jesus so much. It's like, dude, I can't. It doesn't translate to an American audience.
All right, well, we are out of time. So great, guys. Fantastic job. Really enjoyed this. Of course, you can check out episode 1 of the MMA Beat on MMAfighting.com. This has been episode 2. Let us know what you think in the comments if you disagree with anything that we've said or if you disagree with Mike Straka wearing a 3-piece suit here in the middle of summer in New York City.
My daughter made me wear a tie.
Wow, it looks great.
Thank you.
For Jack Encarnacao, Mike Chiappetta, Mike Straka, I'm Ariel Helwani. Thank you so much for watching the MMA Beat.